Cosmic laws, compensation. All of the divine laws of spirit are already a part of the structure of our being, for God is within each of us. We need only allow our mind and heart to materialize them so we can fulfill our true destiny, to act in the image and likeness of God. Such is the case with the divine principle of compensation. Since our origin, we have been endowed with a natural tendency to compensate fairly in return for something received, just as spirit does throughout its creation. To man's credit, it is one of the few cosmic laws that have been given wide recognition within our legal system. Understood to mean something that is given or received as equivalent for service, debt, want, loss, or suffering, compensation is evident in many of our laws, including workers' compensation, accident liability, copyright infringement, and defamation of character, just to name a few. Psychologists point out that when people attempt to disguise undesired traits by exaggerated desired or socially approved traits, they are exhibiting compensatory behavior. So we grin and bear it, put our best foot forward, or put on a happy face in order to mask our true mental and emotional states. Man also has uncovered the principle of compensation in the world of nature. For example, in the mineral kingdom, there is what geologists term the law of isostatic adjustment. This occurs when large areas of the Earth's crust have been depressed topographically by heavy accumulation of ice during the Ice Age. As the ice melted and its weight was transferred to the ocean basin, the land area is compensated by slowly buoying back up, and the process continues to this day. Plant physiologists have been able to describe types of compensation in the plant kingdom. Consider, for instance, plants growing in soils low in nutrient. In order to supply essential elements to fast-growing shoots and leaves, plants compensate for elements unavailable in the soil by translocating them from mature older leaves. Biologists recognize the principle of compensation when a physiological defect in the structure or function of a body part is counterbalanced by greater activity or development of another or several other parts. Compensated heart failure is a good example of how this principle works within the same organ. To put it simply, when an acute moderate heart attack occurs, the heart may fail to pump blood adequately. Automatically, the sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system strengthens the damaged musculature and strongly stimulates the remaining normal muscle. This causes the heart to become a stronger pump, up to double from the damaged state. Mortal man's conception of the universal principle of compensation emphasizes the divine law of equality. Our law stresses equivalent payment for services, loss, or sacrifice. Jesus' instructions to disciples acknowledge the legitimacy of equality as one component of compensation. When he sent out the 12 apostles to teach and to heal, he told them, "Do not accumulate gold or silver or brass in your purses, for a laborer is at least worthy of his food." But Jesus knew that compensation understood from the perspective of only one cosmic law, equality, without manifest only a portion of this law. In his own words, only the least amount. Combining compensation with all the other laws of God, with the totality of Spirit's will, can produce much more if man only has faith in all the divine laws. Lord Michael channeled to El Moria, Mark and me, the Mark Age co-founders, on April 27, 1969. "You have announced independently that you have only the pledge and purpose for enacting God's will upon the earth in the present life form. This will be exacted from you by Spirit and returned unto you blessed and multiplied, that your lifespan will be full of joy, full of activity, full of reward, according to the spiritual concept of remuneration, compensation, and not according to man's understanding of remuneration or blessings." Clearly, then, when we surrender to the will of God, all the principles of Spirit create a multiplication effect when compensation is divine. For us, this multiplication factor expresses itself in many different ways. Consider cases of forgiveness, for example, where we must compensate for the wrongs and failings of others. The Apostle Peter asked Jesus, "My Lord, if my brother is at fault with me, how many times should I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Jesus replied, "I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 77. Interpreted literally, Jesus is saying to Peter, do not just forgive somebody 7 times, but 5,390 times. In other words, forgiveness always is required of us. It is an eternal activity, a principle of Spirit. To be true to ourselves and to God, we must learn to forgive the shortcoming of others, as well as our own mistakes. When we make sacrifices for the good of the whole, Divine compensation manifests as a multiplied reward for services rendered. This was the case of a Mark Age leader in 1973. Here is a part of Sananda's January 24th soul intunement to him, delivered through me. Your own karmic evolvement will accelerate speedily because you have accepted more responsibility than was intended at this particular time for your own growth and expansion. For you have accelerated in a number of directions, but have been decelerated from fulfilling certain soul-evolving patterns and talents. Because of the sacrifice, your accelerated pace of understanding and functioning will be your compensation. Because this is how Spirit does reward those who sacrifice personal self for the overall spiritual need of others and the higher goals of mankind at large. From this instruction, we all can be assured that when we enact the divine law of sacrifice, our compensation by Spirit will be multiplied far beyond what we can imagine. In retrospect, what we have given up will seem insignificant in comparison. What are some of the key elements required of this so we may fulfill this law? In a channeling of April 27, 1969, from my higher self, it was explained we must have faith that all our work and demonstrations, through the thousands of years of evolvement and repeated incarnations, in which we have restated truth principles, have had a worthwhile and fruitful effect on mankind. It must be according to that set standard, because without it we would not be fulfilling the divine law of compensation. That which you have put forth in effort sincerely, purely, and without guile or desire for recompense, must be doubled in return of spiritual grace and function. Enacting this law divinely requires sincerity, being truthful, faithful, straightforward, honest, and genuinely the same within as without. It requires purity, being clear, simple, rather than a mixed-up jumble of thoughts and emotions, and free from anything that impairs or taints us. We have to be without guile. This means we cannot be cunning, artificial, duplicitous, or deceitful. To act in perfect accord with this law, we must be without any desire for recompense, even though we know full well that Spirit will double our good fortune when we live this law to the letter. Divine compensation requires that we be purely selfless. Here is the signal key to the prosperity consciousness which is so much in vogue with New Thought and New Age groups today. We cannot be concerned primarily about our own self-serving prosperity, but rather the prosperity of others. As with all other divine laws, selfishness adulterates this law. Jesus addressed this aspect of the law when he described the kingdom of heaven as being like a landowner who hired laborers to work in his vineyard. From early morning until late in the day he hired them. When it came time for payment, the ones who had worked all day expected to be paid more, but were not. After hearing the complaint, the landowner said, "I am not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the man who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" In this parable, Jesus taught exactly what Lord Michael stated earlier. Spirit's concept of compensation is not the same as man's limited concept of equivalence in remuneration. God's compensation is benevolent, always infinitely more generous than we expect. When we have spiritual grace, when we add to our disposition the ability to grant things freely to others, with goodwill, mercy, decency, and propriety, Spirit will multiply our supply. For we have proved ourselves to be worthy supervisors in a pure vessel through which our Father and Mother can work. In the Bible, this multiplication of Spirit is not the spirit of the law, but the letter of the law. It was the letter of the law in the time of Moses, in the time of Elijah, as well as in the time of Jesus. Without a doubt, it is the letter of the law for us today. The response of the autonomic nerve system during compensated heart failure, cited earlier, reveals how literally, unto the doubling of power and function of a damaged physical organ, Spirit's law manifest. If this is true of our physical form, how much more so must be true of the thoughts and feelings of our mental and emotional aspects? Truly, those who express selfless acts of love and kindness will receive compensation as only Spirit can give. Words can hardly express the vast difference between compensation as mortal man has conceived it in his laws and compensation as Spirit has decreed it in cosmic law. Maybe this anecdote from the New Testament will elucidate. A vivid exchange concerning the divine law of compensation took place between Peter, who symbolically portrays faith in God's law and in Christ, and Jesus, who exemplifies I am self-consciousness. Distressed after years of sacrifice with the prospect of facing an untold number of hardships ahead, Peter exclaimed, "We have left everything and followed you. What will we have?" Jesus replied, "Truly I say to you, that in the new world, when the Son of Man shall sit on the throne of his glory, every man who leaves house or brother or sister or father, or mother or wife or children or fields, for my name's sake, shall receive 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life.